You look like you had a hard day. I want to drip hot wax all over you.
Christian, honey, are you in there?
I can explain, I swear! What up, Shredder? It's Christian from Shred School here. Waxing your snowboard is a lot like making love to a woman. You have to be gentle some of the time, rough some of the time, and I only do it very occasionally. But seriously, if you can't keep up with your friends and you're wondering why you're slower than everyone else, if you're not clearing jumps, if you're getting stuck on cat tracks or in the flats, if your base is dried out, then you need to wax your snowboard. Don't neglect your baby. When you wax your snowboard, it can be a very intimate experience. You form a special bond. And if the whole bonding with your snowboard is a little too much for you, some people say that waxing your own board is therapeutic. Any way you look at it, I like waxing my own snowboard, and I think you will too. Before we get into it, you have to understand a little bit more about how waxing a snowboard works. Snowboards are made from a porous material called polyethylene, and the wax is absorbed into the board itself, helping the board to slide across the snow. In other words, the wax isn't just sitting on top of the board, it actually absorbs into your base. This will be important to know later. So before we get started, there are some prerequisites. You need a couple items to wax your board successfully. Number 1, we have an iron. Number 2, we have snowboard wax. 3, we have a snowboard brush. 4, we have a scraper. And 5, we have a screwdriver. Now, this is not a clothing iron. This is a snowboard waxing iron. Unfortunately, we don't want to use a clothes iron with holes in the base that could potentially damage our snowboard. We want a snowboard iron that has a flat base with no holes. You can buy a waxing iron from your local board shop, and if you don't have a local board shop or if you can't find it there, then go ahead and check online or even check out Amazon. Next, we have the wax. You don't want to use your mom's old candles as wax. You don't want to use skateboard wax as snowboard wax. We want to use actual snowboard wax. And this type of wax is specially formulated for temperature. So when you go shopping for snowboard wax, you can select from warm weather, all temp, or cold weather wax. Now, in general, the warmer the weather, the softer the wax you want to use. When you scrape your fingernail on the wax, it's going to come off very easily if it's warm weather wax. The colder the weather, the harder the wax is going to be. It's going to be very hard to scrape with your fingernail. Once we have our supplies, we want to warm up our board to room temperature. So if you just got home from the mountain, bring your board inside and let it sit in a warm room for a couple of hours. Once it's acclimated, it's time to heat up the iron. Most snowboard irons you just need to plug in. Some have temperature control on them. I should note that you don't want the iron to be smoking when you're waxing your snowboard. Now, some people insist on taking off their bindings before waxing, but I don't do it and I've never had a problem with it. Some people claim that heating up the board loosens your bindings, so we do have a screwdriver on hand to tighten them up afterwards, but I usually never experience this problem. Now, if the base of your board is extremely dirty, you may want to use some base cleaner spray to clean your base before waxing. You just spray it on there and you wipe it off. This is going to be more necessary in springtime riding and if you live on the East Coast. When I lived on the East Coast, my base used to get filthy and I used to use base cleaner all the time, but I haven't had to do it since moving to Colorado. If you have lots of uneven old wax on your snowboard, go ahead and give it a quick scrape before you start waxing. But if your base is dried out, you're going to see that by white spots on your base. You probably don't need to do anything else. So we've got your room temperature board. It's upside down on a flat surface, ideally one where no one will mind us making a mess. We've got an iron that's heated up in wax that's appropriate for the temperature outside. It's time to pour wax all over our snowboard and then scrape it off. I like to start at the nose and hold the iron vertical while pressing the wax up against the iron. The wax will start to drip on the board while you move the iron. The goal is to cover the board in enough wax that once we press the iron into the board, there's enough wax to cover the entire surface. You can drip all along the edges and then fill in the middle, or you can zigzag across the whole board. The key here is don't avoid the edges as they tend to dry out the most. Make sure you drip wax all the way up to your edge. Now that the board is covered in wax, we can set down the wax block. We're going to take the iron and press it into the board and slowly massage the wax into the board, maybe in a circular motion. As the base of the board heats up, the wax will start to absorb into the base. You should be able to visibly see the difference between a spot on the board that has absorbed wax and a spot that you missed. So you're going to cover the whole board from nose to tail, making sure to push wax the whole way out to the edge, and making sure that you heat up the wax enough that it's absorbed into the base. Generally, we want to wax a spot until we can feel warmth on the underside of the board. So I'll put my hand on the underside of the board and I'll feel if it's warm or not, and that means we're heating it up enough to absorb the wax. If we run out of available wax in any one section, just pick up that wax and add more. It's better to err on the side of too much wax than too little, but you'll quickly get a hang of how much you actually need after doing this a couple times. Now it's very important that you do not leave the iron sitting in the same spot for too long or your base will bubble up. So don't leave the hot iron on your board and walk away. You could ruin your snowboard that way. If it looks like you've covered the whole board, it's time to let the wax cool. Go watch a snowboard video for 20 minutes and come back to scrape. Again, we don't want to scrape immediately after finishing our wax. Okay, now we're going to scrape off all of the wax we just laid down. Remember that our base absorbs everything we need, so scraping off the wax, we're just getting rid of the excess. We're not undoing what we just did. Start at the nose, hold the scraper at a steep angle, and press hard into the board. You can't scrape too much wax off, so we're going to get everything. Most people don't press hard enough here. Scrape from the nose to tail, starting on one side of the board and ending on the other. And if your board looks uneven, you didn't do a good enough job. It should be a level surface. You should scrape it evenly the whole way. We're also going to take the small indent in the corner of our scraper and scrape the whole way around our edges to remove excess wax. Next, we're going to use a finishing brush to smooth out the base. Now, it's not a huge deal if you don't own a brush, but if you do have access, it's nice to finish it off. We're going to use a half steel, half horsehair brush, and we're going to start with the steel. That means we're going to press the steel down into the board and then end with the softer side of the brush the whole way down the board. Pick up your snowboard, admire that sexy base, make sure your bindings are tightened, and let's go to the mountain. I love riding my snowboard after a fresh wax. Remember that done is better than perfect here, so don't worry about doing everything perfect. Just get it done. Now, you could just take your board into the shop and avoid all of this, but after getting what's called a machine wax, where they run your board over a waxing machine, you often can't even tell they waxed it. It can be pretty worthless compared to a hand wax. There are a couple commonly asked questions about waxing. Some people ask, can you melt the old wax and use it for next time? I wouldn't recommend it, but I've definitely done it in a pinch if I ran out of wax, or I couldn't afford new wax, or if I missed a spot and I just wanted to fill in that spot. So using the old wax will work. How often should you wax? I like to wax every 3 to 4 days of riding, especially if I'm riding a lot of jumps because I want my speed to be on point. If I'm riding a competition, I'm going to wax every single day before competing. So the night before competition, my board is getting waxed. Now, some people will say they've had their board for 3 years, they've never once waxed it, and it rides super fast. I wouldn't listen to these people. It's not good for your board, and you're probably not getting as much speed as you could. You should also know that your snowboard does come waxed. If you buy a new snowboard, it has what's called a factory wax. So it comes waxed when you buy your board, but you're going to want to wax your board after riding it for about a week. So that's it. How to take care of your baby. How to wax your snowboard. It's super easy. Anyone can do it. Just don't worry about being perfect. Remember, use an actual snowboard iron and snowboard wax. Melt the wax onto your board. Iron it into the base. Let it cool, scrape off the extra wax, and brush it. Make sure you hit the entire base and get ready to fly out on the slope and burn past your friends.
Christian.
Remember, if you take care of your snowboard, it'll take care of you. Peace out, Shredder.